Morning everyone. I'm fairly new to reef restoration, 3 years. I'm also part of the conference organising panel. So I thought I'd do some homework and find out a little bit more. Now to put it in context, and there's been a lot of talk about values in this context or conference, and in Reef Ecologic it's all about people first and leadership and excellence and passion. So what I'm talking about is the people of reef restoration. And I'd like to start with this particular quote and recognise the giants that have come before us, because they have helped us incrementally and sometimes even transformationally improve the science and management and education of reef restoration. While I'm also here, I'm going to give you a bit of a challenge. Who's given a tweet so far at this conference? So only about 10 of you. My challenge is every single one in this room, take a photo of one of the slides, tweet it, send a message, share it. If you've never done it before, talk to the person next to you. Word clouds. You may be familiar with this technique. As part of the NEST project, we're doing a global literature review of the scientific output of reef restoration. So I grabbed all those names based on several hundred publications and put them together in a word cloud. And the bigger the name, the greater the contribution over time. And you can see a couple of common names. Some of the people are here in this audience. And that gives you a bit of an input. But of course, that focuses on the scientist. It doesn't focus on the managers, or the educationists, or the practitioners. We've also heard about indigenous, and I have to talk about history, because indigenous people have been possibly practicing restoration for thousands of years, whether through fish traps that recruit oysters, or moving shellfish, or we heard at the plenary about one of the grandfathers transplanting coral in the 1940s at Turtle Bay. So I'd like to start off with that frame. And oyster reefs have certainly been a big part of reef restoration, particularly in the States, going back well over a century. Huge middens of shells that were put back into the environment, and nowadays they do it on an industrial scale. What you're looking at there is a large ship using water jets to pump the shell back in the water to create a reef to allow recruitment of oysters into those particular bays. Great Barrier Reef Expedition was Low Isles in the 1920s. Again, almost 100 years ago. I was trying to find the first known record of restoration or restoration science, and this is potentially one of them. They had very different techniques in those days. That's a glass viewing box. They dived with a diving helmet, and they cemented some coral to blocks, and they measured the growth of that coral. And very interestingly, they also transplanted a sponge from the Mediterranean in that part of the world to use as bath sponges and commercial industry. So the things you find out. And now a little bit more about the people. These guys started a process, they patented it, it's called Biorock. It involves putting an electric current into steel to turbocharge the calcium carbonate formation of coral. It's Professor Wolf Hilberts and Tom Goreau. There's a number of these reefs throughout the world. Edward Gomez from the Philippines, his name was very big in the word cloud. He started out pioneering assessments of the corals and the invertebrates in the Philippines. He was very focused on aquaculture of giant clams, and then he collaborated on reef restoration in the Philippines, and he also co-authored one of the manuals on how to do this research. And Austin is here at this conference, and he is a giant in reef restoration. And if you talk to him, he says, oh, it's because I've been doing it for 40 years, which is very modest, but he has been everywhere and worked with everyone. And he's also been very generous in providing me with some of the photos that I'm going to show you in this talk. Recognise that man? That's a younger Austin with no grey hair and a little bit skinnier, holding up some of his early coral tree work. And he also pioneered nubbins in the early days, using shells and corals and a whole lot of other things. My particular focus was on the Great Barrier Reef, and I knew Vicky Harry before she passed away. She's actually got a reef named after her here. And she made a great contribution to science and management. And she and David Fisk wrote a paper in 1988 on coral transplantation as a reef management option. Again, I was quite surprised to find that really early thinking. Todd Barber, passionate scuba diver, also involved in business. He created reef balls. It's a sort of an artificial substrate, originally used for diving. It's now been taken through 150 countries throughout the world. Over 500,000 reef balls have been deployed, including Australia. They come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. Buki, Dr. Baruch Rinkevich, is from the Red Sea, and that photo of him is hugging a tree. And he tells me he first got interested in coral restoration because of his love of silviculture. And we had a really good discussion about the past and the future of reef restoration, and he sees some of the biggest challenges as scaling up. He said a lot of the methodology is now proven. We've been able to do it with hundreds of species, lots of different locations, hatcheries. We need to now scale it up and also look at engineering solutions. Ken Nedimyer from the States, he's also been involved in developing coral trees, the same trees that are used at the Fitzroy Islands, where some people will be having a look at those at the field trip tomorrow. He's also been recognised as a CNN hero. He helped set up the Coral Restoration Foundation, and he's been a great contributor, particularly for the conservation and citizen scientists in the States. David Lennon is an Australian. He first got interested in this because he had the Australian distribution for reef balls, and he has then transformed that using 3D technology. He's got some quite innovative materials such as those structures at the bottom right in Sydney Harbour at the moment. He's done some work in the United Arab Emirates, and his job that he's most proud of is somewhere north of Papua New Guinea, where one of the big mining companies wanted to give back to the community, and they put some structures in that allow the coral to grow back quickly, and then the sustainable fishing to start again in that part of the world. Professor Chu Loke Ming is from Hong Kong, probably the most difficult place in the world to undertake reef restoration. This is what it looks like. There's very few species, it's hugely turbid. They've learned some hard lessons with die-off. They've done some interesting stuff with citizen science involvement. They've had to use a combination of things like reef balls and keep it up off the bottom because of the sedimentation problems. Maybe these pictures are a sense of what it could be like in the future if global warming continues. That's quite scary. Japan, I don't think there's anyone at this conference from Japan, unfortunately, but they have been real pioneers in restoration for many, many years, particularly the southern islands around Okinawa. And they haven't just been doing it for biology, they've also been doing it for geopolitical reasons. Some of their islands that are in dispute between Japan and China, they wanted to use reef restoration to make sure the islands stayed there. They've been able to have successful transplantation of many, many corals, and those corals have spawned. So they have been real leaders. And there has been a bit of a language problem, but there's been some great contributors in the history of reef restoration. Thailand, this has all been about scuba diving. Thailand is one of the most popular places in the world to undertake scuba diving training. And there's been a group of people, one of them in this room, that's Nathan Cook, who did it for 7 years, and very proud that he works for Reef Ecologic. And they started out putting structures down, like this tuk-tuk. And then they became much more sophisticated and involving edutourism and transplanting corals and underwater art. And it really has grown to be quite an amazing, diverse facility in Thailand. Here's a photo of the two boys together, Austin and David, both here at this conference. And this is a photo of the first elkhorn cookie trial in 2009. It's not that long ago. Jason DeCaires Taylor, I spoke about yesterday in one of the speed talks, and this is a bit outside the box. This is about artists helping reef restoration. This man has a social media impact of 1 billion people, and he creates sculptures of people and integrates them with coral, and he believes that once he puts them in the water, nature takes over. There's been some fantastic manuals. I've read some of them, I'm sure you have as well. William Precht, Alistair Edwards. There's David Vaughan. He tells me that one of his videos has been seen by 50 million people, and he's produced several videos. So the message is getting out there to the global community, and there's a lot of interest. David created a bit of an accident, and we got microfragmentation. Thank you very much, and he'll be speaking later today. Professor Peter Harrison is one of our pioneers and gurus in Australia. He was one of the ones that helped discover coral spawning at Magnetic Island, and he has pioneered some work in partnership with the Marine Park Authority here in Australia, but also in the Philippines, to larval enhance hatch reefs, and wants to scale that up. A little bit different is planting seaweed. I didn't want to just focus on coral, and Operation Crayweed in Sydney has been fantastic, you know, right on the foreshores, really successful, bringing back crayfish and abalone, so it's got some commercial and recreational benefits as well. This man's one of the real quiet achievers. He set up a training course for people, and that's his desk, and he puts corals on it and then transplants them out. So the educators of reef restoration are fantastic, and we need more of them. And one of the key ways to educate is through TED or TEDx talks, and there's a bunch of them, and I think David's given one, Austin's given one, Kirsten Marvin's given one about baby corals, so I suggest you have a look at those. And again, TEDx talks are seen by millions of people in terms of getting the message out. We've put together a bit of a graph on trying to give a snapshot about the history of reef restoration methods. We've split it into addition and removal, and the removal obviously is things like crown of thorn starfish control and those nasty fish they get in the Caribbean, but there's been a real focus on addition. And here they all are. This is the snapshot. There's only 15 to 17. I would have loved to have put this whole audience, and I do see that next time someone gives this talk, some of the people sitting here will be up there. People from Ames, from Gabrumpa, from James Cook Uni. This is your future. You're making a huge difference. One of the challenges I had with this talk is I wanted to try and classify people into pioneers, scientists, managers, business, communicators, but there's a lot of crossover, and people do many roles, and I think it's really important they do many roles. And the final thing is another quote from John Quincy Adams. If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become a leader, that's exactly what we need in reef restoration. So thank you, everyone.